My name is Meghan Doherty, and I'm the Director of Global Policy and Advocacy with Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights, which is one of the partners of the Sexual Rights Initiative. And the Sexual Rights Initiative is a coalition of 6 national and regional organizations that come together to advance human rights related to sexuality, gender, and reproduction at the Human Rights Council here in Geneva. So Action Canada has been engaging with the Human Rights Council, its predecessor body, the Commission on Human Rights, since 2002. And then the SRI has been working together as a coalition since 2006 when the council was set up. And at that time, it was so important for feminist organizations to find each other, to work together, to advance a broader intersectional perspective through spaces at the UN. And in particular, we saw a lot of opportunity here at the Human Rights Council. And it allowed us to really put forward in very different ways and in different spaces an alternative viewpoint than what was being put forward exclusively by states or even from larger mainstream human rights organizations. And it really drew attention to positioning women and gender and sexuality at the center of the efforts that are going on here. And the work that we do is hard, it's complicated, it's very complex, but when you have an opportunity to make changes at this global level, the impact that they can have around the world, it's important. We see it as an important space to do this work, to be pushing forward these ideas around intersectionality in sexuality and gender and reproduction, and also to make sure that different perspectives are heard here at the Council. And we know that it's really difficult for a lot of human rights defenders, women human rights defenders, to come to the Council for visa restrictions, safety reasons, cost, all of that kind of stuff. And it's important that women's voices from different regions, from different movements are seen, they're heard, and their perspectives are incorporated into the work that's being done here. So the first resolution that we're following is one on violence against women. It's being led by Canada, and this is a resolution that Canada has led for many, many years. And the resolution is focusing this year on online violence against women and girls. And this is quite a new area for the Council to do work on, and so it's very important that from the outset, the resolution is framed around women's rights and women's needs and women's safety, but also to ensure women's freedom of expression and not to have their rights restricted in the name of protection, which is often what happens in the context of the discourse on violence against women. It's about often the discourse leads to further restrictions of women's rights. So the things that we are advocating for in that resolution is to ensure that there is a proper balance for accountability for perpetration of violence against women and girls online, but also that those efforts do not restrict women's rights, women and girls' rights to freedom of expression, to freedom of association, to be able to access information on sexual and reproductive rights that is sometimes censored, that can be limited, and also for people to make sure that the expressions of various forms of sexuality are not censored as well. And so it's a very difficult balance to strike, and we are here to make sure that that balance is struck. The second resolution we're following is around discrimination against women, and this resolution is focusing around the barriers to women's economic empowerment. And this resolution has incredible potential because not only of the content that's in there, but also the framing. And so it tries not to instrumentalize women's rights as a way of achieving economic development. It places women's autonomy at the center of it and really looking at what are the root causes that are preventing women from exercising their economic rights. And it draws a lot of content from the most recent working group on discrimination against women's report. It also references the backlash that feminist organizers face, and also really recognizes women's and girls doing activism in this area as legitimate political actors and have space, they have a right to engage in these policies, and they have the right to challenge these policies and to push back against this idea that, you know, the empowerment of women is good for the economy. You know, that's a lazy argument and is not what human rights say about what women are entitled to and what we need in order to claim those rights. Each session, there are particular thematic areas that become the focus. And so for the June session in particular, there is a lot of work around the human rights of women. And each session provides opportunities to engage with different organizations. You know, you don't need to be in Geneva to engage at the Human Rights Council. I suppose that's what I would like to say the most. The Human Rights Council doesn't exist if the countries aren't there, and we all can participate and encourage our governments to take strong progressive positions here and to actively articulate what are our demands. This is not it's not a privilege for us to be here, it's a right. We all deserve to be here. And governments have to be accountable to us. They are accountable to us. So that is one of the main reasons why I would encourage people to learn more, to get engaged, and to find out what's going on here, and in particular feminists, because we need more feminists in these spaces. We need to change the discourse here that tries to delegitimize women's rights on a regular basis. And so we are here pushing back, but we always need more voices from different regions, from different perspectives, from different movements, and we want to come together to have a very strong pushback against those actors that seem to delegitimize us, not only here physically in this space, but also the work that we do. And we have a right to be here. We all have a right to be here. So we have experienced a lot of pushback from different states, from different civil society actors, from even private corporations, because and large donors who are funding the activities of these anti-rights actors. And they operate in a multitude of different ways to try to not only delegitimize women's human rights by challenging our very existence here, to challenge the universality of human rights and trying to be selective in the human rights that are applicable in different situations. And we all know that human rights are universal. We're all entitled to them because we're human. There is no special human rights. We all have the same ones, but you will find actors here that will try to limit those rights, particularly as they relate to sexuality, gender, and reproduction. And the way that they operate is, on the one hand, can be very obvious by having side events or making statements that are unequivocally opposed to women's rights and the broader feminist agenda. But then you also have much more subtle ways in which states and different actors try to undermine our rights, and that can be through trying to influence the text of resolutions to weaken measure for accountability and recognition of rights. You also can see pressure around the funding of UN agencies to try to delegitimize the work of UN agencies and to starve them of resources so they can't effectively do their work. And then also we see efforts to try and attack the independent experts that work at the UN, but they don't work for the UN. They work for the people, and questioning their independence and charges of bias. And the UN is set up in such a way that it is supposed to be that it is universal, that each state has equal say and equal investment in the functioning of the Human Rights Council and the UN as a whole. But we see that some states, they seek to tear down the parts that they feel that they don't that doesn't coincide with their worldview as governments, not necessarily the worldview of the people who live in their countries. So I think at the Human Rights Council, as in every movement, any kind of work to create social change requires solidarity, for one, and the intersectionality aspect of it. In some sense, it's become a bit of a buzzword that can often lose its meaning. But here, what that, from the SRI's perspective and from my perspective, what that means is that we look at the whole context of people's lives, and we look at the underlying structural issues that are maybe not immediately obvious when you look at the different forms of discrimination, but have a huge, huge impact on them. And recognizing that people have multiple identities and they have, their lives are full and have a range of experiences, but also that the oppressions that people experience and are subjected to, there is a commonality in those oppressions that does not actually privilege one oppression over the other. It is a reinforcing of oppressions. So looking at poverty and looking at housing, looking at access to abortion, the ways in which women's reproductive rights are restricted, looking at the criminalization of sexuality, the criminalization of sex workers and HIV transmission. All of these things are interrelated, and you can't take one out and isolate them as without looking at all these other aspects that influence it. And so intersectionality is a big and complicated word because we live big and complicated lives. And I think that how we try to do that in this space is really hard because that's not the way most institutions work. They like to work on single issues, and part of our job here is to push them to consider things in a broader perspective that recognizes not only the urgency of things like violence and discrimination, but also really trying to challenge the underlying structures of power that disadvantage people in different